Hi, I'm Pete and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. This morning we brought the last batch of our winter pigs to the butcher. Now we started out with 18 pigs and we brought them in 3 batches of 6 because that's all our small livestock trailer will handle. You've seen these pigs since they were piglets last fall on this channel, and I'm glad to say that our plan for growing them out in the winter worked great. Remember, we had 3 points: keeping them dry via good bedding and out of the wind here in the barn because there's nothing to forage for outside when the ground is frozen anyway. Number 2, giving them a continuous supply of clean water via nipple drinkers on a tank that you see behind me. And number 3, giving them continuous access to clean feed via this rotary feeder that we bought last fall. Because of these things, we were able to grow these pigs out in 6 months during the cold weather instead of the usual 7 months, and that should all drop to our bottom line. So in this video, I'm going to show you how we load pigs because frankly, it's never the same twice in a row. It's always a challenge, much more so than cattle. And I'm going to show you how we unload them at our USDA butcher and talk about some of the requirements for unloading pigs and leaving them at a USDA butcher. Some of them are really kind of odd, and I think you'll find it interesting, so stay tuned. When we started raising pigs 7 years ago, we used to hire a hauler to come pick them up and bring them to the butcher, but it was incredibly stressful on loading day because when the truck backed up, we had to get the pigs onto the trailer relatively quickly, and pigs are pretty reluctant sometimes. One of the best investments we ever made was an old horse trailer, and we use that to load pigs and cattle now. And so how I do it to make it as least stressful as possible is about a week before it's time to load, I back the trailer up to the pen, and if it's a pasture, I back it up to the edge of the pasture. I cut a hole in the fence as I've done here, put the trailer in, open the doors to the trailer, and start feeding the pigs out of the trailer so they get comfortable with going into the trailer. And I feed them out of the trailer all week long. In the afternoon, before I'm going to bring them to the butcher, I restrict their feed so they get pretty hungry for the next morning when we're going to load them onto the trailer. That way, when I put the feed out, they all rush onto the trailer, and usually all I have to do is close the doors and drive the trailer away. Now, as I said, we started out with 18 pigs, and 3 weeks ago and 6 weeks ago, we loaded up 6 pigs each time to take them, and those batches were relatively easy because not all the pigs had to get onto the trailer. But for this batch, we had to make sure we got all the rest of them, and I knew it was going to be a chore. So a couple days before, we put up a cattle panel to restrict the pen to the front third of the pen to kind of limit how much they could travel and hopefully get them onto the trailer easy. Well, loading day came and we had them all up here, and I put feed in the trailer, and as I said, something always gets in the way. The pigs didn't want to get onto the trailer. So we worked them over into this area with a couple pieces of plywood, drove in some fence posts, and then had them right behind the trailer so that we could more easily push them into the trailer. Once pigs make up their mind that they don't want to go someplace, there's little you can do to change their mind. So once you have your first shot and they don't go where you want them to go, then you have to come up with alternative solutions. These pigs have been different from any other batch that we've raised. They were never hand shy. I had problems with them nipping at me in the pen. I had problems with them biting the hose and things when I would fill up their water. Typically, pigs are a little more timid than that, and I knew this batch was going to be trouble to load because of that. The first batch that we brought, the first 6 pigs, we got them on the trailer all right, but once we got them to the butcher, they would not get off the trailer, and we tried everything we could to get them off, and we wound up having to tie ropes around their front shoulders and pull them off one by one. It was an incredibly stressful experience for both the pigs and us, and after it we said, we're never going to do that again. So I talked to our butcher about what happened trying to get the pigs off the trailer, and he said, well, you need to get a cattle prod. And always before I had thought, I don't want to use a cattle prod. Cattle prods are inhumane, you know, they're stressful on the pig. But then I started to think about it more logically after his recommendation, and I thought, well, The pigs were stressed for an extended period of time as we were trying to get them off the trailer with rope harnesses, and giving them a shock that's similar to the shock they would get from an electric fence to get them moving along seems like a much more precise and humane way, because the duration is very short and they go right off the trailer, than dragging them off. So we bought a cattle prod, and I am so grateful we did. Now in a pinch like this morning, when they're all clustered and they're determined not to go into the trailer, we can give them a shock with a cattle prod. It gets the lead pigs moving and the other ones follow. After you use the cattle prod a few times, the pigs learn to recognize the sight of it, so all you need to do is touch them with it. You don't have to shock them, and they'll move along. Because I was so hesitant to use a cattle prod to move animals, I checked into who I view the leading authority is, and that's Temple Grandin, to see what she said about the use of cattle prods. And she pretty much said exactly the route that we had followed, which is cattle prods are a tool of last resort. You need to first set up conditions so the animal will want to move, and make sure you have all that covered. And in the end, if you get an animal that's still stubborn, you can use a cattle prod to judiciously move them along. Our butcher's a small operation, and he takes all the animals that he's going to slaughter for the week on Monday. He does all of his slaughtering on Monday, and then he cuts the rest of the week. So we have to have them there by first thing Monday morning, and we unload them into numbered pens which need to be filled in a particular order. So we were the first ones there, and we got the furthest pen in the back. One of the federal rules for USDA butchers is that you can't leave feed or bedding in the pens to entice the pigs out of the trailer. It all is bare concrete. You have to get them to come off some other way, and there's lots of different methods for doing that. There's a swinging gate at the unloading area, so you can use that to kind of push the pigs over, because there's a big step there. Pigs hate going up and down steps, and it makes unloading there a real pain, but it's something we've just learned how to deal with, and gradually we force them over the step, and then it's pretty much easy to get them to walk around and into the pen that they need to go in. That went so much better than it does without this thing. You don't need to use it very much, but when you need it, you need it.
Thank God for that cattle prod.
When we got into livestock farming, one of the first things we learned about were USDA butcher requirements, because frankly it's a mess. My feeling is that if we're growing animals and selling the meat directly to the customers that will eat them, the government shouldn't get in the middle of that. I have liability insurance. I'm accountable to the customer. I don't need a government stamp on the meat that I sell. But we follow the rules, and the rules are we can't butcher red meat on premises. It has to go to a USDA inspected butcher house. Now, a USDA inspected butcher house means that they have a USDA inspector on the premises looking at the meat and putting a government stamp of approval on it. There's actually a beet juice seal that goes on the carcasses, and you can see that in some of our cuts. That inspector's there when they slaughter, it's there when they cut up. USDA is a big difference from what's called a custom exempt butcher. A custom exempt butcher doesn't have a USDA inspector on premises. Yes, the federal government has to approve the facility, or maybe it's the state government, I forget which, but anyway, the facility has to be approved in terms of its setup, but the butcher does his work without somebody standing over him. The difference is that if you go to a custom exempt butcher, you can't sell that meat retail by the cut like we do at farmers market. Somebody has to buy the meat from you while it's still on the hoof before it goes to the butcher. Then the butcher butchers it actually for them, and they take possession of the meat. It's a screwy system. And of course, if you can go the custom exempt route by selling your meat before it's butchered, you'll save a lot of money, because custom exempt butchers don't have to pay for a USDA inspector. Their prices are a lot cheaper. There are lots of odd rules about having animals processed at a USDA facility, most of which I had no idea of until we gradually interacted with our butcher more. The first rule, which is kind of the most surprising, is that once an animal crosses the property line of the butcher house, it becomes the property of the federal government. It's no longer your animal. So when we load animals off at the butcher, they aren't ours anymore. They aren't ours again until we pick up the cuts. And if the animal you bring doesn't pass inspection for one reason or another, it remains the property of the federal government and they dispose of it. You can't get it back. As far as USDA requirements regarding animals suitable for initial slaughter, the only thing I've ever seen is that the animal needs to be able to get on its feet and walk into the butcher floor. That's all. Once we unload animals at the butcher, we can't leave any feed or bedding for them. The floors all have to be bare concrete. I expect for sanitation requirements, but it seems a little goofy. The butcher does provide water up until slaughter time to keep the animals hydrated. After your animal has been slaughtered and the carcass is hanging in the cooler, the federal government selects at random carcasses to be tested for antibiotic residue because some people are allergic to antibiotics in their residue. They want to make sure that it's not in the meat. We've had pigs tested this way before. It's not uncommon. The implications of it are that your animal gets held up about a week as the test gets sent off to a laboratory and they wait for the results. The final requirement is, even though the butcher house is independently owned, it has an inspector on site that is a federal employee. So the butcher house schedule and hours are according to the federal government, which means they get all the holidays off, all the minor holidays, and us farmers are working all of them, they get off. And if we come between 9 and 9:30 or 12 and 12:30, they will not do business with us because that is their mandated break time. I am always glad to see the last of our pigs go, and I am so happy that this pen is now empty. And I'll be even happier when the pork comes back and is in our freezers. The pork that we've raised this winter will last us through the summer sales season, and right now we're getting ready to wean piglets for our summer growing season to sell next winter. We'll be raising them out on pasture, and I'll show you how we set up the fences and how we take care of pigs on pasture, because it's quite different in the winter. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Have a great day. It's finally sunny and warm out. I'll see you next time.